You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly and neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. You may find all your sales and rental equipment needs at McAllister.com. We are pleased to announce our podcast is a member of the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle and me at leadersandlegends.net. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast today. Our guest is Niki Kelly. She's well known to many of you, but she has a new gig as editor-in-chief of Indiana Capital Chronicle, part of a nationwide news organization. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about her career, the Cincinnati Bengals, because she became a local celebrity as the Bengals were marching to the Super Bowl, asked Governor Holcomb. And we are joined today by State House reporter emeritus of Wish TV, Jim Shella. Jim, Niki, thank you both very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Robert. Niki, great to see you again.
Good to see you.
Let's talk about your new venture first, because this is something that I find quite exciting. It's new and different, not just for you. It will be also for news consumers. Tell me first of all about States Newsroom, the umbrella organization.
Yeah, it's a national nonprofit that started out in North Carolina, and they said, look, and you know this from being at the State House long ago. Back in the day, every newspaper had their own reporter here, and we had large groups of people covering everything that happens in that building on all three branches of government. But as newspapers have struggled and just staffing has gone down for lots of media entities, we have fewer and fewer reporters covering the Capitol. So States Newsroom wanted to come up with a way to fill those gaps. So they've been expanding slowly into states. We will be the 28th state that they launch in here at the end of the month. And so the idea is they use national donors, local donors, anyone who wants to give. It's a nonprofit, and fund this so that we can provide coverage to all Hoosiers for free. And also we have what's called a Creative Commons.
No subscription.
Correct. You can subscribe to our newsletter, which will come to you daily, where you can see the biggest items of the day, or you can just mark our website and check, throughout the day. And we'll have a strong social media. There's no subscription, but then again, you can donate if you like what you're reading. And then basically, we have a Creative Commons license, which means any newspaper in the state, any TV station, any radio station can use our stuff for free and republish, so that we can get...
They have to give you credit.
Correct. I mean, yes, we get credit. But the idea being some of these outlets that need help and want to cover this but just can't afford to can rely on our coverage.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the need for that, because I can tell you that back in the late 80s, early 90s, there would be something north of 40 credentialed reporters covering the General Assembly here in Indiana. And I think the number of credentials may be high, but the number of reporters over there on a daily basis is single digits most days, correct?
Most days, yeah. I mean, during session, it's a little different, but you got to remember our state government is doing things that impact your lives every day, not just during session. So that's one of the things is that we can obviously cover some state agencies, some overall policies a little better. Yeah, I mean, maybe 20 during session are covering it. And even, for instance, back when you were there, or, I remember Kevin Rader, obviously at WTHR, you guys were in that building every day covering those sessions. And even nowadays, it's more kind of parachuting in, doing the occasional flashy bill. It's not sort of sustained coverage.
A different kind of coverage and less comprehensive. This is kind of the future of the news business in some ways, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's certainly an idea and a venture that some places are trying is, let's try to figure out ways. Obviously, the newspaper structure has struggled. We started out giving everything for free online, and then we realized, oh, crap, we're giving everything for free online, and we lost subscribers. So, I think all journalism is struggling a little, and we're trying to figure out ways to reach more people in a good way.
And yet you're talking about giving it away for free online.
I know, right?
How is it?
Supported by donors. So, I mean, just like, for instance, PBS or, WFYI or, something like that. So,
and your outlet is going to be a website, yep. Online stories. Will there be audio and video?
There might be. Initially, we're going to just start with the basics, but we've got some equipment that we can start doing some of that. I want to kind of slowly roll it out. We can obviously, without any equipment, we can post interviews we do with people. We can add them to story links, and so people can do that. So the video might be a little more trouble or a little more work we need to do, but we can do audio pretty quick.
Okay, so basically an online newspaper. Mm-hmm. Covering state government. Will you go beyond state government?
I mean, we'll focus on state government, state policies, for instance, on housing or the economy or things like that. I'm sure if there was some sort of big state news that was grabbing attention, we'd be on it, whether it was particularly government related or not.
Okay.
And one other thing to add is we are definitely going to provide commentary from all sides. So, I'm working with different columnists, including Robert Bain.
I was told I didn't have to write about politics all the time. So I said, yes, I'll take it.
So we're trying to, learn from other people. And obviously me, who worked at the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette for 26 years, I'm trying to get some voices in there that aren't just in central Indiana.
How big's your staff?
We have 3 reporters hired, and so it's 3 reporters and me, which frankly is the largest staff covering the State House. I mean, the Star during session has 2 people kind of, covering it on a daily basis. Now, they have other reporters who might come in and cover, this is a transportation bill, so their transportation reporter will come in that day kind of thing. So, yeah, we've hired Whitney Downard, who's covered the State House for the last 5 years for CNHI, which is a network of smaller Indiana newspapers. And then we hired Casey Smith, who has been at the Associated Press for several years covering the State House. And then we also got a great young reporter, Leslie Bonilla Muniz, from the Indianapolis Business Journal. She was covering city affairs.
Okay, so she covered government, if not state government.
Exactly.
I always told people when I was covering the State House that, first of all, this what goes on here affects everybody's life in the state of Indiana, 6 million people. But secondly, I don't think a lot of folks at home understand how important news coverage is to what goes on.
Yeah, I mean, we get all caught up on the Washington stuff, right? And I'm not saying what they do there doesn't impact us. It does. But, we should be looking more at the state level because, everything from, I don't know, when your kid can get a driver's license to, whether you're going to get a new refund from the government. I mean, they cover
whether you need a license to carry a gun.
Right. I mean, they cover every bit of everyone's life here in Indiana, and I do wish people would pay more attention to state news, and hopefully this is an outlet for that.
Okay. I mean, you haven't, as we record this, you haven't yet launched.
Correct. We will be announcing right as this airs, and then launching the end of the month. We're just deciding which day, dependent on a possible special session that the governor's calling.
And what's the website address?
You know what? Oh my God, I don't even know it yet. It's still being built as of right now.
But will it be Capital Chronicle?
Yep. IndianaCapitalChronicle.com should get you there.
Okay.
Okay. This whole idea, it's a long-term project, I'm sure, is the plan. Do you expect that at some point you will require a subscription?
Not that I've been told. That kind of goes against kind of the founding of States Newsroom as a whole. They've been running since 2017. Or after us, they're launching Arkansas, so they've never pulled back on coverage in any of those states. They've only grown it. They also have a Washington D.C. bureau, so that if our senators or lawmakers make news, we can get more direct stuff from them for Indiana.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about you and your career and what brought you to this, because Robert mentioned it a little bit off the top. You're an Ohio native.
I am.
Went to Ohio University.
That's right. Bobcats, Athens, Ohio.
You and Peter King.
Yes, that is accurate. I have a funny story about Peter King sometime, I'll tell you.
We're ready right now.
Yeah.
No, he was there for some event, and I remember he was managing editor when he was at the Post where I worked, and I was managing editor. So he and I had a big sit down, but he was given a speech at OU, and he brought in pizza and beer for the whole staff because, us poor college kids. So he was great to sit around and talk with the young reporters.
We're talking about Peter King, who wrote for years for Sports Illustrated and covered football, or covers it as well, or better than anyone. Sorry to interrupt, Jim.
That's not a problem. NFL writer. Okay, what brought you to Indiana?
When I was in my senior year in college, I came to a job fair here in Indiana. I was at Ball State, and a group of us came over, and I got like 4 interviews out of that. In the end, I didn't get an immediate job out of that, but I got one in Steubenville, Ohio, at a small town paper called the Herald Star, and they were kind of also covered on the West Virginia Panhandle. And then the Journal Gazette in Fort Wayne at 3 months emailed me and said, "Hey, we got a position," and I felt bad and thought that was, I couldn't leave real quickly. And at 6 months, they tried again. And at 9 months, they tried again. And by that time, we were off a cops reporter into a bureau reporter. So I took it and moved here 9 months after I graduated.
Did you start at the State House?
Nope. I started up in Fort Wayne, actually in a bureau in DeKalb County. I covered smaller counties, doing a little bit of everything. And I'm glad I had that because, from being at the State House, we cover every single topic and issue you can come up with. So, I had my years covering the school board and picking up cops reports and local business openings and, that kind of thing before I moved into the main office to cover state and federal courts. And then ultimately down here.
And I mean, that required a life change.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you're working for a 4-way newspaper. You got to live in Indianapolis now. And
I was excited about it. I used to joke that I had the best job ever because I was always 2 hours away from any editor, and now I guess it's even better because I'm hours and hours away from my, top bosses.
Time zones away.
Yeah, right. So I loved moving down here. I covered one session on a sort of part-time basis to see if I liked it, and then moved down here full-time.
How many sessions have you covered?
Oh, crap. It's like 23. I think it's 23, not counting special sessions.
Was Jim Shella nice to you when you were a young cub reporter here at the State House, or did he big time you?
I mean, he would tell funny jokes, and you could always hear his laugh down the hallway. That was the best part of being in the State House basement, was Jim's laugh.
I've been told that before.
I believe it.
Life's about having fun.
But she wouldn't necessarily. I mean,
and if you can't laugh at politicians,
that's what I say. I can get along with anyone who has a sense of humor. How you vote is immaterial. Do you have a sense of humor? Can you laugh? But
And,
did you?
and as a journalist, I say I get along with anyone who turns my call.
Yeah. But do you remember when Niki came? I mean, there were a lot more reporters then, but am I wrong?
Sure.
Did you take Leslie's? Mm-hmm. So Leslie Weidenbender, who's now the editor of the IBJ, who we want to come on this podcast whenever she wants, you took that gig.
Because she moved to the Louisville Courier-Journal as their State House reporter.
Right.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. No, I do remember. Well, tell me about the Journal Gazette, if you would, because I think there's a reason why you stayed there for 26 years.
Sure. I mean,
it's not like every other newspaper.
It's not. I mean, it's a family-owned newspaper, which is pretty rare in these day and ages. It's not. It doesn't belong to Gannett or to, this or that, subsidiary. It's a family-owned paper up there. So I always had a lot of support from the publisher and the editor, and they were very loyal to me. They gave me a lot of freedom to build the beat the way I wanted. And so I loved being there. I occasionally would think about leaving. But, there aren't a terrible amount of opportunities down here. I was starting to feel toward the end of this that I maybe wanted to move into editing. I mean, there's only so many budget committees you can handle and so many of covering the same, bills again and again where you want to try to stretch yourself and challenge yourself. And this came just out of nowhere and at a great time.
So are you going to be only editing now, or will you do some reporting as well?
I will mostly be editing. I'm not going to say I wouldn't pitch in if something was needed, but I will mostly be editing, and I'll write a weekly editorial too.
Okay. You, while working for the Journal Gazette, and since, you've been very active on social media.
Yeah. I went to some, investigative conference years and years ago where they talked about how great Twitter was, and I got on it thinking, I'm going to hate Twitter, because to me it was just, another thing as a reporter I had to do. And I didn't realize at the time what a great asset it is. I started live tweeting meetings, and it sounds like, well, I'm not taking notes, but you are. It's just a string of your tweets are your notes, for the story. That became a big deal. And also, I would say the mostly when COVID first hit was when Twitter really became this thing. So many people reaching out, needing help, wanting questions answered. It was humbling. And, sometimes I would do it right in the middle of one of those COVID briefings. Someone would text me and say, can you please ask the governor this? And I would, toss it in there. So, I know Twitter has its downside, from time to time. And I'm sure I've had a day or two where it wasn't great, but overall, I think it's been a joy getting to, communicate with people. And I hear more, from more and more people how they follow what's going on at the State House through my feed. And I will continue that even with this.
That was going to be my next question. You expect that you'll remain a presence on.
I'm sure. And I'm quite sure I'll be monitoring fun hearings and things like that while sitting at my new desk. I won't be in the basement of the State House anymore, but I'll still be following it.
You had for those who don't know, the accommodations for reporters are they're a lot better than they used to be. Back in the 80s, we were in plywood shacks in the middle of the floor on the third and fourth floors. They've since have moved the media to cubicles in the basement, most of which don't have a ceiling. And I know yours is very near the men's room.
Oh my God, it is. And I remember during COVID, I had to actually ask them to keep the door closed because all I could hear, like they were keeping it open so people didn't have to touch the door, which I get, but all I would hear was flushing and talking and the like jet-like hand dryer. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was a treat. Although I can't tell you how many people stop by my shack after a visit to the bathroom just to chat. So I'll miss that.
And for what it's worth, your new offices are on the 8th floor of the Indiana State Teachers Association building across the street. So you have not only great accommodations, you have a wonderful view of the State House. I
do. I'm pretty excited. This is the nicest office I've ever had. So I've been in bureaus and I never said anything bad about our State House digs. They were great. They allowed you to keep on the pulse of everything. There was some occasional issues, some occasional bugs or spiders what was it? The brown recluse spiders. Yeah. But overall, I think everyone over there loves those, and we're still going to have an interim shack over there for our reporters when they're covering those late nights for the session and stuff.
So let's talk a little bit about being a government reporter, because do you describe yourself, what you've been doing previously as a government reporter or a political reporter or both?
I probably lean a little more toward government. Obviously, politics is part of it, but policy has always been more my sort of thing. I more like to dig into things on, how we're doing on our pensions or whatever. So obviously politics are part of it, but I prefer policy.
I used to give a fair number of speeches when I was working as a State House reporter, and I would start out with a series of quotes, one of which was from Peter Russell, or it was Russell Baker was the guy's name, Russell Baker.
Were you going to say Peter Rustoven?
I was thinking of Peter Baker, who's with the New York Times now. Russell Baker said that being a State House reporter is someone who stands in marble hallways waiting for important people to lie to him. Would you say that was a fair description?
No.
Well, I've talked to, forgive me, Nikki, I'm very sorry, but I'm just laughing because I've talked to you after a client of mine lied to you, and I remember your reaction, so just feel free to say as you please.
I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but certainly the majority of sources I deal with do not lie. And are good, upstanding people who are doing what they think is right. There's always the bad apples, right? In every, whether you're a lawyer or a journalist or a lawmaker, but overall, I think most of my sources have treated me pretty well.
How is it then between reporters in the sense, or among reporters, where you're both friends and colleagues, but competitors? Leslie, we mentioned before, is obviously a good friend of yours. I think we all love Ed Feigenbaum, and your friend here, Mr. Shella. You guys are somewhat competing against each other, but also somewhat helping each other. If there's like a just in news service or something like that nobody likes. How do you guys, both of you, I guess this is a question to both of you, how do you navigate that dynamic where you're both on the same team yet being competitive?
Well, if I could just start with that,
yeah.
I was watching the PGA tournament yesterday, where one golfer is a stroke behind the leader, and the leader hits a great shot, and the guy who was behind looked at him and gave him a thumbs up. You're all in the same thing. You're in the same endeavor, and you kind of want everybody to do well. You just want to do better. You want to beat the other guy, but sometimes it takes a team effort to chase down a story, to nail down a politician. So there's a push pull there where you are in competition, but you're also working together.
Yeah, it's cheesily kind of like a family, because we're all in that basement and we're all doing those late nights and we're all trying to understand this massive budget document someone just gave us, But there are times when you can tell that someone is working on a story. Suddenly their office door is closed, their conversations are a little more muted in the hallway, and you're like, ooh, what are they working on, So, but obviously, I was at the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette, so I had a specific coverage area, and I still covered state news, but I also had an eye toward Northeast Indiana. So I've had, fellow reporters, oftentimes you'll be sitting in a hearing, and you hear, I don't know, something about a Fort Wayne thing put in a bill, and they will immediately text me, hey, check this bill. Someone put something Fort Wayne related in it, because Fort Wayne isn't there, bailiwick. So we have a little bit of enough separation where you can still help people, help each other out. You can still, be collegial and still try to beat the person, And there were times you mentioned, I remember one time during the Religious Freedom Restoration Act when Mike Pence was signing that bill and they wouldn't tell us when or where. And we had people posted at every door, including there were national, like CNN was in town, whatever. And we'd be like, because there are like 8 or 9 ways you can get in and out of that building. And we had people posted at every door. And he still slipped us, by the way.
You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest today is the editor-in-chief of the Indiana Capital Chronicle, part of the States Newsroom nonprofit organization. You can find her writing and that of her staff, which she's talked about, IndianaCapitalChronicle.com. We're talking with Niki Kelly, co-hosted by her friend, our friend, and frequent co-host, Jim Shella. Niki, is there a particular Hoosier leader or legend you admire?
Wow. Wow. Admire. Looking back, once you cover a number of governors, I'm on number 5, I think. I do miss Mitch Daniels's time in the governor's office. It was always full of news. He was always available to answer questions, and he, was a person who knew all the details, and you didn't have to get back to you a lot. He was very accessible. That doesn't mean we always agreed. We certainly had some disagreements from time to time on stories, but I missed his time in the office. It was pretty cool to cover.
Mitch Daniels would hold a Friday news conference, especially during the session, where he, as governors do, he would have some opening remarks, but they weren't always very lengthy. And then he would take questions and would essentially take all questions and sometimes be standing there for over an hour, 70 minutes on occasion. And there, as a reporter, you'd walk out of those sessions and say, I'm holding on to 4, 5, 6 stories here. Which ones do I have the time to tell in depth? It was a different animal than with most governors.
Yeah, he was a lot more open on like a bill, if, they're working on a bill that does this. He was a lot more open on it. Now you constantly just get, we'll wait till it gets to my desk and I'll review it, and that's not very helpful to educate Hoosiers on the topic.
Was it because he was so active and came to office like, I'm going to shake up this state and we need to do it, and if we don't do it, we're going to fall further and further behind? So as a reporter, not a political point, but just as a reporter, it's like, look, we like to cover action.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there was so much going on. At that point, there had been 12 years, I think, of Democrat control. And he came in and had 16. He had so many plans, and there was never a dull moment under him. So, yeah, some of it was just he had a lot that he wanted to change.
And for both of you, maybe, so much of what you write or put on TV requires access. How do you balance needing that access with calling someone and going, this isn't right, or you're punking me out here, or you're not giving me what I need? That's got to be a bit of a delicate balancing act, because you can just kind of get froze out.
Well, I think it depends on who you're dealing with. I think the people who are good at it on the government side know that they're going to have contentious experiences with reporters and can deal with it. Like with everything, not everybody's good at it. So yeah, you gotta weigh whether you wanna risk losing a contact once in a while. But I guess I would err on losing the contact side of things.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's pick your battles, right? You're not going to pick every tiny little thing. You're going to wait for, the bigger stories that you really need.
Did you ever, let's say it a different way, did you ever I'm calling the chief of staff, or the next time I see the governor, I'm going to bring this up to him direct. I mean, did you feel like you had to go beyond someone to get what you wanted because it was that bad?
Sure, sometimes. A lot of times what happens there is if you're dealing with a state agency and you're just running into wall after wall, then you go to the governor's office and say, hey, I've been working on this for 2 weeks. They are just not responding, not being helpful. And so I've definitely had to do that. Lots.
What was it when I was in the mayor's office? I would get those calls from like Mary Mills or whomever and say, hey, agency X isn't giving me. And I'm like, okay. When I'd go down to whatever agency it is and say, so when Greg Ballard said he was running on the most and have the most open and transparent administration in Indianapolis history, did you miss that part? Let me remind you of it as we move on. But being from Fort Wayne, covering it from the Fort Wayne paper, did you feel in any way that you got slighted is not the word I want to use, but that there was a lot of attention from politicos and elected officials on Indianapolis media, and therefore if they were made happy, then everybody else was just kind of whatever?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely happened from time to time. And especially, once my paper got a paywall and people stopped being able to read it, it just, everyone was always asking for a copy of this or that. Being a sort of outstate reporter, you kind of learn to have a thick skin. There are a number of times over the years I would break stories. It would get hardly any attention. 2 weeks later, the Star would do kind of a follow-up, and they would advance it. I'm not, but it would get all this big attention, and you're like, okay. So that does happen.
Go ahead.
I just want to talk about your TV career.
Oh, thanks to you.
Well, yeah, thanks to you, I would
Jim's
say.
put us all on TV, hasn't he?
Well, but I was the host and producer of Indiana Week in Review, and I invited you to come on initially as a substitute on the panel. You were reluctant in the beginning, correct?
Well, I mean, journalists, I think in general, aren't used to being, in front of the camera. So I think I was a little reluctant in the beginning. You worry about what if I say something and that kind of thing. Once I did it a few times, you felt more comfortable. You also realized you get a lot of contacts that way. You get a lot of people coming up and saying, oh my gosh, I saw you on TV last night. Tell Ann not to, or whatever. But yeah, I was a regular fill-in for years for you, and then finally got called up to the big leagues.
But it's a weekly show, appears on Friday evening, but it helped you every day. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
He said with the leading question.
It did help me every day. Now, I mean, if you know the show, it's the host and then a Democrat and a Republican. So they obviously are very set and have opinions. And then it's two reporters. So, you had to watch and be careful that I wasn't giving opinion, that I was focusing my comments on facts and sort of what happens next on an issue and not.
That's what I did when I was on there. Did I not, Jim?
I think selective facts is what I would say. Selective facts. But the format is set up so that you get a little partisan dust up, and then you have reporters try to sort through it and tell folks what's what.
Yep. Tamp it down a little, clear some things up.
Well, has that changed? Jim was a guest on the podcast, was I think maybe the second or third guest when the Leaders and Legends podcast started almost more than 3 years ago now. And so you are as well placed. You started the State House, I think we said in 1999, to see how much things have changed. So how much have they changed, or have they not?
I mean, on the technology side, everything's different. With you went from writing a story that was due at the same time every day, and it was posted in the morning. Now, you're constantly updating the web pages. You're constantly tweeting. You're constantly, your deadlines are like a rolling deadline for whenever something's done happening. So on that side of just simply how journalism has changed has been pretty massive. Now, inside the building, I would say, it's definitely a little more fractured in there amongst some of the caucuses. Back when I first started, there was a lot more sort of going out, having fun, getting to know each other. There doesn't seem to be a lot of that anymore. It's everyone kind of goes back to their hotel room and that kind of thing. So it's definitely not as open of a place, I don't think, anymore.
Has that been deleterious to the state? In other words, would we get better things done for the state if there was more collegiality? Because it's a little bit of an opportunity cost. The more that elected officials are working out deals and crafting legislation over at St. Elmo's, the less transparent it is. And so we need to get more things done. And I always kind of laugh. I'm like, well, then you want the smoke-filled room to return, don't you? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, that's kind of how.
Well, I mean, that's all dependent on your perspective. I mean, if you're coming at it from a liberal side, you're going to say, yeah, we need more camaraderie, more compromise, more bipartisanship. If you're coming from a Republican side, you're like, it's great. It's working great. We have supermajorities and it's fantastic.
What would you say, and we're going to talk about RFRA in a minute, much to my consternation, even though I will say that my lovely friend Jim Shella did call me after the Stephanopoulos interview just to make sure I was okay. Called me that Sunday.
It was a rough morning.
Yeah. Here's the deal. Here was the call. Are you doing okay? Well, I still have to interview tomorrow. Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. Like, he wasn't going to let me off the hook just because I was,
He checked first.
He did.
Here's a fun fact for you. The remote studio where Mike Pence did the Stephanopoulos interview is in an office building here downtown. I was in that same chair in that same studio 2 hours previous. I was live on MSNBC. Nobody remembered that I was on TV that day.
Shocking.
Is that the biggest story the two of you covered in terms of national implications?
In terms of national implications, absolutely. In terms of just more toward the state, I would say when Governor O'Bannon died in office, that was, that was a whole nother level of things you can't imagine that you're doing, and you're trying to focus on everything and on the news and not have an emotional reaction to a person who is, for all intents and purposes, a colleague who you run into the hallway and they ask you how your cat is and, things like that. And so you're trying to do all the journalism you need to, but also not have some sort of emotional reaction. And it's hard to kind of tell your body not to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I was in New Orleans when Dan Quayle was picked to be George Bush's running mate.
That would be September, probably of '88.
Yeah, I hate to rank stories on what was most important, what wasn't.
It's fair to say that RFRA
was
combined
big
with social media.
It was big. Yeah, and I mean, always remember that we were about to host a Final Four here, and that was a big impetus to the controversy. Was the NCAA was threatening to take the Final Four away at the last minute.
Yeah, and I remember there was some discussion after like post-mortem on RFRA here in Indiana that slightly kind of criticized the news media for how did it kind of get that far. And it's like, wait a minute, we've been writing about it since January, people. We've been talking about it since January, but it sort of all exploded the week they finally passed it.
Well, I could say, I think the statute, 7 years, right? So I think it'd be right at 7 years. Statute of limitations has ended on this. But the poll that I saw in late spring, early summer, as part of the Pence campaign, had his approval rating drop considerably from what it was in the early winter. Number one reason, who's to blame for RFRA? The news media. Despite the fact that then Governor Pence's approval rating had dropped. So how do you square that circle?
Well, I mean, there's always a tendency to shoot the messenger.
Exactly.
Is it more pervasive of when it's Republicans? Because, my people aren't exactly enamored with the national news media these days, or the local media here sometimes.
Well, if you go back to the 90s, even the early days of talk radio, you could go on the Indiana GOP website, and they would have instructions there for people on how to call in to talk radio and how to deal with the media. And I think that there there has, for decades, been this belief among Republicans that there is a liberal slant to the people who work in the media, and they paint it with a broad brush, and they have always done it, and it's not fair, it's not right, but what are you going to do? You can go to work and do your job.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Going back then, I mean, like Jim said, it's easy to shoot the messenger. I think obviously the things we were pointing out in the various stories and articles and TV segments obviously got through, because let's remember, it's the lawmakers who decided to fix the law, not us. We can't do that on our own. So
we talked to Speaker Bosma about that when he came on the podcast.
I think Mike Pence wanted to make it seem like we were blowing it out of proportion. And then once he went on Stephanopoulos, obviously, as we know, I mean, it just, any chance that they had of salvaging that went.
So
then he held a news conference over at the State Library.
Oh, yeah.
That was attended by most of the national media,
and Greg Louganis.
And
actually, he got kicked out. He and his dog got kicked out.
Yeah.
This was an official news conference, not a political one. Therefore, I wasn't involved. Just can we have that disclaimer, Spangle?
It was
make
official.
sure that's in there.
Yes. And Greg Louganis was in town for some other purpose,
and he just showed up. And they told him he couldn't stay because he wasn't a reporter. He came over to the State House and watched it with Bosma in his office.
Yeah. But during that news conference, Mike Pence said a couple of things that only fanned the controversy. To say that they didn't handle that well is a vast understatement.
So if I had told you on that day, the three of us are walking, even though I wasn't there, the three of us are walking back to the parking lot, and I go, you know what, Jim, Nikki, here's the deal. I'll bet you $1 that Mike Pence is going to be the next vice president of the United States, serving under Donald J. Trump, you would have said.
In the interview that I did on MSNBC on the morning of the Stephanopoulos interview, I was asked if Mike Pence's motivation was a desire to run for president, and I said that ship has sailed.
At that point, we weren't even sure he could be reelected governor, right?
Well, that's right.
How quickly it went downhill.
Right. So, and I don't think anybody had contemplated him being vice president,
including himself, probably.
Right.
I mean, it was a crazy. I would have taken like $1,000 bet from you, easy.
And does that just prove, as the saying goes, that a day is a lifetime in politics? Have you seen anything else, Nikki, in your career change so quickly?
No.
A person's fate. I mean, his living fate, obviously.
Yeah. No. I mean that moves so fast, and having to pull himself off the ballot, become tapped for VP, and then I would love to know if he actually ever thought they would win. That would be like,
I can help you with that.
Do you?
Well, I retired the week of the 2016 election. Wish TV threw a reception for me on Friday, and the Governor Pence was invited to be there and had accepted. He was not planning on being elected vice president on Tuesday, and his office sent a Sagamore of the Wabash with my name on it, but there was nobody there to present it. They didn't have a plan B.
Were you surprised that he was chosen as vice president? Forget that he won, because I think we could all concede that was an upset of historic proportions, probably the greatest in American history, against a candidate who should have won, could have won, Hillary. We're not talking about Reagan in '84 winning 525 electoral votes.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Pence and Donald Trump are an odd couple,
to say the least.
And so, as it was happening, as journalists, what do you? Because I was going to next question. I'm going to ask you is
every
about
every night and talk to my husband about how surreal everything was. We'd be camped out at the Conrad because do you remember when the Trump's plane broke down, and so he had to stay there, and so then suddenly Newt Gingrich is coming into town, and they're all going to the Conrad to try to win the VP nod. I mean, it was insane. I couldn't have believed anything like that would happen.
And fun.
It was super fun.
From a journalist perspective, how disappointed were you that Mitch Daniels did not run for president in 12?
I mean, yeah, strictly from a journalism perspective, it would have been fun to cover because, I'd covered him for 8 years. I had a lot of background, a lot of information, I think, that could have helped readers. And so, yeah, that would have been super fun.
Well, my perspective on that's a little different. I broke the story that he was going to Purdue, so while everybody else is spending lots of time trying to figure out how and when they can do the story that he's going to run for president, I actually, with some help, found my way to the story that was his next move. So that was a good day for me.
You and Mr. Osterley, you're close, aren't you?
Well, we know each other. I'm not giving him up.
We're not accusing you, Bill. That's all we're saying.
And of course, the Indianapolis Star broke the he's not running for president story.
Because it was walked to the newsroom.
Exactly.
By a couple of his people on Saturday night.
I still remember being a little bitter that there was a discussion about how there was some sort of national story that came out, like how the Star got this scoop, and it said, well, they asked for it. And I was like, oh my God, you don't think every single one of us asked for that scoop? Give me a break. But you people are the only ones who had, could take them out to a steak dinner and
I remember
come up
that
with a deal.
I had to go on Channel 6 that day wearing my green My Man Mitch shirt. So yeah, I remember it was a Sunday. You guys talked a little bit earlier about the dearth of State House reporters. Do you have a theory as to why? Is it straight up economics? Or what do you think is driving this? Because, I mean, even in the time I left the mayor's office in 2010, we're recording this on June of 2022. I think there are maybe 3 or 4 Indianapolis reporters who were still around when I was there. That was just 11 years ago. What's driving this change, which is obvious and has created the need for the States Newsroom approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of it is economic. There's probably, a little bit. We hate to talk about clicks, right? But when you look at the metrics, you can't get past the fact that what people say they want and what they click on are different things. And so, they'll say, why don't we have good news? Why are we always covering crime? And yet you do a good story next to a crime story, and which one gets opened 1,000 more times, So, but in the end, that's economic too, right?
The internet has changed everything, and media outlets, whether they're newspapers or TV stations or radio stations, were all slow to adapt to the change. And I've seen statistics on this, and I can't quote them at the moment, but a lot of the advertising has gone to websites and Facebook, and what was an ad in a newspaper or on a TV station is now appearing someplace else, and so salaries have gone down, staff sizes have gone down. It's economics are the biggest factor. But there are other factors. I think that people don't realize the importance of government news from the state and local level. And back to the clicks, the folks running newsrooms aren't willing to send somebody out on a story, no matter how important, if the viewers don't watch it, if they don't click on it. And so that changes the focus of coverage.
Did you ever want to cover something else, like go back to crime or sports or something else, or become an opinion writer?
I do love sports, but no, I mean, I love covering courts. So I used to love that up in Fort Wayne, and I still loved covering the Indiana Supreme Court, and I like digging into an opinion and making people understand it. That's sort of, I think, the other one that I really enjoy.
Yeah, and not me. Once I became a State House and political reporter, I can tell you that I was not going to go to something else. And I guess this is a question I wanted to ask you, Niki, because it's my contention. Most reporters, you might cover a trial that lasts a week or 2 weeks, but most reporters are doing daily stories. It's something that happened today. Maybe there's some background that you've learned from covering the issue in the past. But being a State House reporter is, I think, far more difficult because you have to know a range of issues. You have to know the history on every issue. I mean, there's a lot of institutional knowledge that's required with regard to players and attitudes, and yet it's fun. Explain that, can you?
Yeah, I mean, you get to know you're experts on, like, little mini experts on so many different topics, since there's no topic that the state doesn't interact with for citizens. So that's super fun. One thing I loved about covering the State House, and I will miss, is never knowing when you go into a hearing. Like, you'll sit there for one bill and suddenly another bill will come up and you'll be like, I absolutely did not know that law existed, and suddenly you're learning something. And that was cool, that I never felt like I stopped learning in that job. There was always something new, always something fresh to cover.
How did you handle people who just didn't want to talk to you?
I mean,
and by that I mean kind of elected officials more than anyone else, obviously, because some people aren't ever going to talk to you because they're told, you'll have to call the press person. I'm not allowed to speak to you.
Yeah, I mean, I've had that occasionally over the time. You just sort of try to focus them. A lot of what I got, the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette had a very liberal editorial page, and so I was often painted with that, and they'd say, well, I don't like the Journal-Gazette, you're liberal. And I'd say, okay, well, let's talk about that. I'm the reporter who's doing the basic news stories, and try to separate that so that they could feel like they would trust me. And I would point out, talk to some of your colleagues and ask them if I can be trusted. And so I'd just sort of try to push through it.
Did you feel like you had your own sort of, and we do like Karen, by the way, Karen Francisco,
yep.
What a sweetheart. So fun to work with on everything. Even when I was at the state Republican Party, she never treated, she was always like, yeah, sure, send it in. Did you feel like the folks who were representing Fort Wayne in the House and Senate kind of like had your back in a way, like, hey, I know we're on different parts of this prism, but we're from the same area. We want great things for Fort Wayne. How can we be helpful?
Yeah, I would say on 95% of the things, absolutely. There were occasional issues that there were some butting heads on, and they wanted a bill to maybe fly through under the radar, so it didn't get attention. That happened on occasion, but overall, I'd say, yeah, it was pretty collegial. More and more, though, in the past recent years, when you do election profiles and things like that, more and more since Donald Trump was elected president, to be honest, people just refuse to even speak to you about basics like, where'd you go to school? Why are you running? What are the key issues that are important to you? They just absolutely refuse. And so that's been a little different to get used to.
Donald Trump has changed the nature of political discourse in this country on a number of levels. And the fact that he labeled the media as enemy of the people is not helpful, I don't think, for anybody. Certainly it made our jobs tougher, but I think it denies the public information they need when people are unwilling to talk to reporters and think it's okay. And I think,
So not to be a snot.
But he's going to be a snot.
Referring to myself.
Yes.
I don't agree with that characterization at all. The enemy of the people characterization. So yeah. I agree with you on that. And we don't do big P politics on the Leaders and Legends podcast because we love everyone. But is there nothing to be said for how the Washington, D.C. media frames and covers stories and the language they use? The recent example being the complete burying of the armed man outside Kavanaugh's house, which in some major
How'd you find out about that?
Which in some major organizations did not get covered at all. Well, because the internet has widened the definition of media for good or for ill. But the idea that an armed potential intruder outside a Supreme Court justice's house should get no mentions at all on multiple outlets for days seems to fuel the Republican angst against
Robert,
just DC media, not
Robert. Put down that big brush.
I mean that's what
that was a specific example.
Yeah.
That's what I was asking about.
But you heard about it. I saw lots of coverage on it. It's one of those stories, unfortunately, that there's not a lot to report. I mean, after you report that the guy's there and he's been arrested, and here's why he was arrested. And it get like. It got covered up by the shooting in Uvalde, Texas, I do believe. The media tends to focus on bigger stories. Just ask Dick Lugar about announcing for president on the day of the Oklahoma City bombing. Yeah. So 1995. Yeah, he didn't get much coverage either, and that had nothing to do with anybody's political viewpoint. It's just the nature of the media. But there's one of the problems we have with the media, and this is a problem that the media has created, I believe, is we have these cable news channels that have a point of view. And, MSNBC is clearly on the left-hand side. Fox News is on the right-hand side. And they do these programs that are supposed to be straight news, and then they do other programs that are opinion, and they look the same. And they're not labeled opinion.
And it's all commentators, not journalists. It really skews everyone's perspective.
And that's what you ran into a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people, I mean, you can't tell the difference. None of it is labeled. In a newspaper, at least it says opinion on the top of the opinion page, so you know that that's opinion and the other is news. It's all done on purpose because folks are who run these cable channels are trying to find their base and play to their base. But it's long term for the benefit of the republic and for the benefit of straightforward media. It is not helpful.
You mentioned a few minutes ago, Niki, that you will be writing an editorial every week.
I will. That'll be very different. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I mean, I just think they'll be kind of tame at first until I get used to actually inserting myself, because I've spent 30 years writing in a way that what I feel isn't part of what I'm writing. So that'll be a new challenge for me.
And that'll be issue-based editorials or, hey, this piece of legislation kind of thing?
Yeah, just whatever is kind of catching my eye that week, probably.
Candidate endorsements?
You know what?
Question right out of my mouth. That's
nice.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? I honestly haven't even thought about candidate endorsements. That's something I'm going to have to think about. I think my initial answer is no. A, because I'm not sure anyone pays attention to them. B, I can't get half the candidates in to talk to us anymore.
Well, that's something like the Marion County prosecutor. It's just Marion County, but they have jurisdiction over the state house matters.
Right. Yeah, so we'll see on that.
We have reached the point in the Leaders and Legends podcast, where we ask the same 5 questions. Now, Niki, you have listened to the podcast before, so you know these questions are coming.
I've heard them, but I did not remind myself of them, so here we go.
Jim, do you want to ask them?
No, these are your questions,
are you sure?
Robert.
They're right there. Ask her.
Oh my goodness, it's an honor.
You guys could share.
I'm not sure I can.
He's
read
so
this.
rusty. It's not on a teleprompter, so he can't figure it out.
He had to take his glasses off.
All right, Niki, what was your first job?
Oh, okay. So, first job, so I worked for my dad. That probably doesn't count, right?
Oh, it does.
Okay, so my dad was a Snap-on tool dealer, and I cleaned his truck and did his broken tools and stuff every week.
And you hung the calendar?
There was always a calendar. But as far as not within my own family, my first job was at a dry cleaners.
The cashier?
No, I actually press the clothing twice a week, and that job sucks. It is super hot. And
I believe it.
Let me tell you, this shirt I'm wearing today's got too much starch. I got to talk to somebody. Question number 2. What was your first concert?
My parents took me to the Kenny Rogers Oak Ridge Boys concert when I was in 3rd grade. And I only remember it because back then, we got our hair done for it. It was such a big deal. And they put these gold flakes in my hair. But and one of the flakes got into my eye in the middle of the concert and cut my eye.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was horrible. But
what was the first concert you paid for your own ticket?
Oh, paid for my own ticket?
Mm-hmm.
Ooh. Gosh. probably, oh, this is so terrible. New Kids on the Block.
You admitted to it.
That was Shella's first concert, too.
Question number 3. If you could suggest any book for someone to read, what book would you recommend?
Oh, wow. My book club is going to be very interested in this.
Where's Kate Shepard when you need her?
I know, right? So I actually just did finish a book, and it was really great. So I'll throw this one out there. I read Bad Blood, which is the story of the Elizabeth Holmes Theranos scandal, and it's done by a Wall Street Journal journalist called Carrie Rue, and it is excellent. I mean, talk about some amazing journalism, that then blossomed into a full-form book. But so that was a really great book.
Question number 4. If you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
That's a hard one because a lot of great events in history aren't very fun, right? They're like depressing, and I don't know that I want to see some of those. So I'm going to go with one. I'm going to go with the moon landing. I would like to feel what that felt like as a citizenry back then when everyone was all in together on something, because I don't
And
feel
everything
like
else was falling apart.
maybe, but for that moment they were all in on that thing. They focused on that and everyone was supportive of it. I think that would be kind of cool. And obviously I'm not a conspiracy theorist who doesn't think that happened.
Final question. If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record, just to chat, whom would you choose?
Okay, with the caveat, like off the record, but they actually have to answer the questions, right?
Correct.
I would say Mike Pence, because I have a lot of questions about kind of what he really felt about being vice president, what he really felt about going through RFRA and the weirdness between running for governor and then unexpectedly getting tapped as VP. I think that would be an interesting conversation if he answered them, which he sometimes does not do.
And my former boss, Mike Pence, is the only living Indiana governor or lieutenant governor who has not been on the Leaders and Legends podcast.
Oh my goodness, he's right. I believe he lives in Carmel. You should be able to find him.
Zionsville? I thought. I'll reach out to him when his book comes. Cross my fingers. I'm sure I won't be a high priority, but I mean, it would complete the list. We did not have one final question, which we have to ask. And Niki became a sports celebrity as the Cincinnati Bengals marched to the Super Bowl. So, A, what did you think about that sort of extra attention you got in a fun way? And B, what are they going to do this year, this NFL season?
Wow, that was so exciting. Honestly, I've been a Bengal fan. My parents have had they had season tickets growing up, so I went, every Sunday, and my dad went to the 2 previous Super Bowls. He thought about going to this one. I told him no because we lost the 2 previous ones, and I thought he was a bad luck charm, but as it didn't work out. No, it was super fun. It was a lot of fun on Twitter. People really caught on to the fact that I was a Bengal fan. Everywhere I went, people would congratulate me, and at first I would be like, what? And I'm like, oh, the Bengals. Yeah, I got it. So I'm super excited about this season. I really hope Indiana native Jesse Bates signs his franchise tender tag so that he can get on the field. That's a little unclear right now, and he's the anchor of our defense. So,
were your parents at the famous coldest game in history, minus 57 against the Chargers when they beat the Chargers?
Yes, my dad tells a story that he would always bring Jack Daniels in with his pop. And he tells the story that he put it in the thing and he went like that and it was just frozen. Just all together.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Final question. Did our friend and your friend, did you guys become closer? You and Mr. Cam Savage. Did you text? Did you tweet at each other? Did you share each other's pain?
Absolutely. There were definitely a lot of texts. By the way, during that run, the playoffs, I'm telling you, the minute every game was over, I could not get off my phone for 2 hours because it was just bombarding with texts, DMs, tweets. It was super fun. Not as much fun when they lost, but it was still exciting because we didn't, no one could have thought that starting the year. So,
and now you're going to kind of expect it with the talent they have.
Yeah, that's right. Joe Burrow, born in Athens, Ohio, by the way, and his dad was a coach at my alma mater.
Oh, my goodness. They just get rid of those helmets.
Hey, don't mess with the helmet. I have earrings for that.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest has been Niki Kelly. She is the editor-in-chief of the Indiana Capital Chronicle, which you may find at indianacapitalchronicle.com. And that is part of the States Newsroom organization. And our co-host has been the lovely and talented Jim Shella. Thanks, Jim. I love doing these podcasts with you. You make them so much more fun. Niki, thank you for your time and best of luck on your new endeavor.
Thanks for having me, and definitely sign up for the newsletter and try to support us.
Thanks, Robert. Great fun.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.